The day Linda Lambert showed up at my property with a cease and desist letter about my heated shed was the day I realized the Pine Valley Homeowners Association had officially lost its collective mind. I'm Tyler Patterson, and I've lived in Pine Valley, Pennsylvania for 8 years. It's a quiet township about 40 minutes outside Pittsburgh, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. And the biggest excitement usually involves the annual fall festival, or someone spotting a black bear rummaging through trash cans. I work as an emergency management coordinator for Allegheny County, which means my job involves preparing for disasters that hopefully never happen. But when they do happen, people are pretty glad I was ready. That morning in late January started normal enough. I was in my garage workshop, organizing some supplies, when I heard the unmistakable sound of heels clicking on my driveway. Through the window, I spotted Linda Lambert marching toward my front door like she was leading a military invasion. Linda was the president of our HOA, a position she'd held for 6 years and treated like she was running a small country. She was 52, always dressed like she was about to attend a business meeting, and had the kind of haircut that screamed, "I need to speak to the manager," from 3 blocks away. I met her at the door before she could ring the bell. "Tyler," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to discuss your shed situation." My shed situation. I looked past her at the heated storage shed I'd installed 3 months ago. It sat at the back corner of my property, a well-built 12 by 16-foot structure with proper insulation, heating, and even electricity. "What about it?" She thrust a folder at me. "This structure violates HOA bylaws section 14, subsection C, regarding outbuildings. You didn't get approval before construction, and it exceeds the size limitations outlined in our community guidelines." I took the folder but didn't open it. "Linda, I submitted the application last October. I waited the required 30 days. Nobody responded, so according to the bylaws, that constitutes automatic approval." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I have no record of any such application." "That's interesting, because I have a certified mail receipt showing it was delivered to your address on October 15th. I kept my voice level. Years of dealing with bureaucracy had taught me that staying calm was the best weapon against unreasonable people. "Be that as it may, the structure is too large and constitutes a visual blight on the neighborhood. I'm requiring you to remove it within 30 days, or the HOA will begin fining you $500 per day until compliance is achieved." I felt my jaw tighten. A visual blight. "It's cedar-sided, matches my house perfectly, and you can barely see it from the street. Mrs. Henderson 3 doors down has a rusted metal shed held together with duct tape, but somehow mine is the problem. Mrs. Henderson's shed predates the current bylaws. Yours does not." 30 days, Mr. Patterson." She turned on her heel and walked back to her white Lexus SUV. I stood there for a moment, watching her drive away, then went inside and called my lawyer. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres who I'd worked with on county contracts, listened to my situation and sighed. "Do you have documentation of everything? Copies of the application, the certified mail receipt, photos of the shed, the building permits from the township, everything?" "Good. Don't remove anything. Let me send them a letter explaining that you're in full compliance and any fines will be challenged in court. HOAs have power, but they're not above the law." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find a bright orange notice stapled to my front door. The HOA had voted in an emergency session to implement an immediate moratorium on all heated outbuildings pending a safety review. My shed was specifically mentioned as the catalyst for this new policy. The notice stated I had 48 hours to disconnect the heating and electrical systems or face immediate fines. I called Rebecca again. She was less diplomatic this time. This is harassment. They can't implement retroactive rules targeting a specific property owner. I'll file an injunction. But Linda wasn't done. 3 days after that, I received a visit from the Township Code Enforcement Officer, a tired-looking guy named Marcus Webb, who I'd actually worked with on emergency preparedness drills. "Tyler, I'm sorry about this," he said, standing on my porch with a clipboard. "I got a complaint about an unpermitted structure." "I have all my permits," I said, already heading inside to grab the file I'd started keeping on my dining room table. Township approved it, fire marshal signed off, electrical inspection passed. Everything's documented. Marcus flipped through the papers and nodded. "Yeah, this is all in order. Who filed the complaint?" "Take a wild guess." He rubbed his face. "Linda Lambert, ding, ding, ding." "Look, between you and me, she's called our office 6 times this month about various violations in your neighborhood. The other 5 were bogus too, but I have to respond to every complaint." He handed back my paperwork. "You're good. I'll file my report saying everything's compliant." After he left, I stood in my driveway and stared at the shed. It wasn't just any shed. That structure housed something important, something that Linda and her HOA cronies clearly didn't understand. Maybe it was time they learned exactly what they were trying to shut down. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. These meetings were usually sparsely attended, mostly just Linda and her core group of supporters. Patricia Morrison, who lived for neighborhood gossip, Frank Delacroix, a retired accountant who treated HOA finances like he was managing a Fortune 500 company, and Susan Cho, who generally went along with whatever Linda suggested. But this meeting, I planned to attend, and I planned to bring guests. I spent the week making calls and sending emails. First, I contacted Bill Granger, the township supervisor who'd worked with me on our emergency preparedness initiatives. Then I reached out to representatives from the County Emergency Management Office. I also sent an invitation to the local newspaper, the Pine Valley Gazette, whose reporter Jennifer Mills had been looking for something more interesting than school board meetings to cover. Thursday evening arrived cold and clear. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a modest building that served as the township's hub for various civic functions. I arrived 20 minutes early and found Linda already there, setting up a projector and arranging papers on the table at the front of the room. She glanced up when I entered, and her expression soured. "This meeting is for HOA members only." "I am an HOA member, Linda. I pay my dues every year on time. Members in good standing. You're currently in violation of multiple bylaws. According to you, my lawyer disagrees, and since no court has ruled on the matter, I'm still in good standing." I took a seat in the front row. Other residents began trickling in. To Linda's visible surprise, the room filled up. Apparently, word had spread that something interesting might happen tonight. By 7 o'clock, at least 40 people occupied the folding chairs, far more than the usual 5 or 6 attendees. Bill Granger arrived with Karen Foster from the County Emergency Management Office. Jennifer Mills came in with her notebook and camera. Linda watched this parade with growing unease. "Let's begin," Linda said sharply at 7 on the dot. "First order of business is the ongoing violation by Tyler Patterson regarding an unpermitted heated shed structure. Point of order," I said, standing up. "The shed was properly permitted through the township. I have documentation that's been verified by code enforcement." "The township permits are irrelevant to HOA bylaws," Patricia Morrison chimed in. She was sitting next to Linda, wearing a purple cardigan and a smug expression. "Actually," Rebecca Torres said, standing up from where she'd been sitting in the back, "Township permits supersede HOA rules when it comes to structures. The HOA can enforce aesthetic guidelines within reason, but cannot prohibit something the Township has explicitly approved." Linda's face flushed. "Who are you?" "Rebecca Torres, Mr. Patterson's legal counsel. I'm here as an observer." "This is highly irregular," Frank Delacroix said. "We don't allow lawyers at HOA meetings." "You don't allow them," Rebecca said calmly, "or your bylaws don't mention them." "Because I've read your bylaws cover to cover, and there's nothing preventing an HOA member from bringing counsel to a meeting. The meetings are open to all members." Linda looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the grounds. Instead, she shuffled her papers. "Fine. As I was saying, the structure in question violates our community standards and must be removed." "Before you go further down this road," I said, remaining standing, "I think everyone here should understand what exactly you're demanding I remove." I pulled out my phone and connected it to my laptop, which I'd brought specifically for this purpose. "Can I use the projector?" "No," Linda said. "Yes," said Gary Mitchell, another HOA member who I'd helped last year when he needed advice on emergency generators during a power outage. "I want to hear what Tyler has to say." Several other voices murmured agreement. Linda's face went from flushed to nearly purple, but she stepped aside. I connected to the projector and pulled up the first image. My shed from the outside, neat and professional looking. This is the structure in question. Cedar siding, architectural shingles matching my house, proper foundation, all permits obtained and inspected. Next image. The interior. Rows of organized shelving units, labeled containers, and a small climate control system. This is what's inside. This shed serves as an auxiliary emergency supply depot for Pine Valley Township. I maintain it at my own expense as part of my work with county emergency management. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Bill Granger stood up. "Can I explain the context here?" Linda looked ready to explode, but she couldn't really say no with this many witnesses. "Fine." Bill moved to the front. He was a big guy with a gray beard, the kind of person who immediately commanded respect in a room. "For those who don't know, I'm Bill Granger, Township Supervisor. 3 years ago, Tyler approached me about improving our emergency preparedness. See, Pine Valley doesn't have a dedicated emergency services building. Our fire department is volunteer-run, and we don't have space to store comprehensive disaster supplies." He gestured at the screen, which still showed the interior of my shed. Tyler offered to house supplies at his property. "We're talking water purification equipment, emergency medical supplies, backup communications gear, portable heating units, non-perishable food stores that can feed 100 people for a week. All temperature controlled, all maintained by Tyler, all at his expense except for the supplies themselves, which are funded through county emergency management grants." Karen Foster stood up next. She was in her 40s, with short brown hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who dealt with crises for a living. "I'm Karen Foster, Allegheny County Emergency Management. What Bill said is correct. Tyler Patterson is one of our most reliable coordinating volunteers. That shed is registered with the county as an official emergency supply point. During the ice storm 2 years ago, when we had widespread power outages, supplies from Tyler's shed helped keep the warming center operational." The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. I saw several people turning to look at Linda, whose expression had gone from angry to trapped. "I wasn't aware of any of this," she said stiffly. "You would have been if you'd responded to my original permit application, where I clearly stated the shed's purpose," I replied. You also would have known if you'd attended any township meetings in the past 3 years, where emergency preparedness has been discussed multiple times. Jennifer Mills was scribbling furiously in her notebook. Linda noticed. "This is a private HOA meeting," Linda snapped at her. HOA meetings are required by Pennsylvania law to be open to all members, and minutes must be made available, Jennifer said without looking up. "I'm a Pine Valley resident and an HOA member. I have every right to be here." Susan Cho, who'd been quiet until now, raised her hand tentatively. "Linda, if this shed is being used for emergency supplies for the whole township, maybe we should reconsider our position." "The bylaws are the bylaws," Linda said. "Personal circumstances don't create exemptions." "Actually," Rebecca interjected, "Pennsylvania law includes specific provisions protecting structures used for public safety purposes. Even private property used for emergency management functions receives certain protections from restrictive covenants." I could see Linda's control of the meeting slipping away. She tried to regain it. "We'll table this discussion for a full board review. I move that we vote tonight on whether to drop all actions against Tyler Patterson's shed," Gary Mitchell called out. "Second," someone else said. "That's not how this works," Patricia Morrison protested. "Actually, according to your own bylaws, any HOA member can make a motion, and if it's seconded, it must be voted on," Rebecca said. "I believe that's in Section 3 of your governing documents." Linda looked at Frank, who was flipping through a binder. He nodded reluctantly. "That's technically correct. The vote wasn't even close. 37 members voted to drop all actions against my shed. Only Linda, Patricia, and Frank voted against. Susan Cho abstained. I thought that would be the end of it. I should have known better. The following week, I got a call from Bill Granger. His voice was tight with anger. "Tyler, someone filed a complaint with the county about improper storage of emergency supplies. They're claiming safety violations, unauthorized use of government property, you name it. Let me guess. Linda." She didn't sign the complaint herself. It was filed by someone named Patricia Morrison, but I'd bet my truck Linda put her up to it. The county ended up sending an inspector, a by-the-book guy named Douglas Chen, who spent 3 hours going through my shed with a checklist. I walked him through everything: the inventory system, the climate control logs, the security measures, the maintenance schedules. When he finished, he shook his head. "This is one of the most organized supply points I've seen. Whoever filed this complaint either doesn't know what they're talking about or has an ulterior motive." "It's the latter," I said. "Yeah, I figured." He closed his folder. "I'll file a report clearing you of any violations. But just so you're aware, filing false reports with the county can result in penalties. If you know who did this, you might want to mention that to them." I called Rebecca. "Can Linda and Patricia face consequences for the false complaint?" "Possibly. Particularly if you can prove it's part of a pattern of harassment. Document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every complaint. If this continues, we might be looking at a civil harassment suit." It continued. 2 days later, my electricity was shut off. Not the whole house, just the circuit running to the shed. I discovered it when I went out to check the temperature logs and found the climate control system offline. Someone had physically flipped the breaker and then jammed a piece of wood into the panel to prevent it from being turned back on. I called the police. The responding officer was Dan Hughes, a township cop I knew from various community meetings. He took photos, took my statement, and wrote up a report about the vandalism. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "I have suspicions, but no proof." "The HOA president who's been giving you trouble, maybe, or someone she convinced to do it." He tapped his pen against his notepad. "You have security cameras, I didn't. That was about to change." Within 2 days, I had a complete security system installed around my property, including cameras covering the shed from multiple angles. The system uploaded footage to cloud storage continuously. If anyone came near that shed again, I'd have video evidence. The cameras paid for themselves within a week. On a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work, my phone pinged with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera feed and watched Linda Lambert walk across my backyard toward the shed. She looked around furtively, then tried the door. It was locked. She tried to peer through the window, cupping her hands against the glass. Then Patricia Morrison joined her, and they started taking photos of the shed from every angle. I saved the footage and sent it to Rebecca with a text. "Is this trespassing?" Her response came quickly. "Absolutely." "File a police report." I called Dan Hughes directly. He came out that evening and watched the footage. "Yeah, that's trespassing," he said. "Do you want to press charges?" I thought about it. Pressing charges would escalate things significantly, but Linda clearly wasn't going to stop on her own. "Not yet," I said, "but I want this documented, and I want you to have a conversation with Linda about property rights." Dan nodded. "I can do that." He went to Linda's house that night. I wasn't there, but according to Dan's report, Linda claimed she had a right to inspect properties for HOA violations. Dan informed her that HOA authority didn't extend to entering private property without permission, and doing so again would result in charges. The next HOA newsletter, distributed to all residents via email, included a new section written by Linda. It was titled "Community Standards and Public Safety Concerns," and strongly implied that I was storing dangerous materials and putting the neighborhood at risk. It didn't mention me by name, but it described my property and the shed in enough detail that everyone would know. That was a mistake on Linda's part. I forwarded the newsletter to Rebecca, Bill Granger, Karen Foster, and Jennifer Mills at the Gazette. Jennifer's article came out 3 days later on the front page. HOA President challenges Township emergency preparedness efforts. It was a detailed piece explaining the function of my shed, including interviews with Bill and Karen praising the emergency supply system. It also included quotes from the HOA newsletter and comments from other residents who supported the emergency prep work. The article made Linda look petty and unreasonable. The community response was swift. I started getting emails and calls from neighbors thanking me for maintaining the supply depot. Several people stopped by to apologize for not speaking up sooner. Gary Mitchell told me that he and several other HOA members were drafting a petition to remove Linda as president. But Linda wasn't done fighting. The following week, I received a certified letter informing me that the HOA was placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $15,000, resulting from 30 days of violations at $500 per day. I stared at the letter in disbelief. They were actually going through with this. Rebecca was less surprised. "It's a pressure tactic. They're trying to force you to comply by making things as difficult as possible. We'll challenge the lien in court, but that takes time." "How much time?" "Could be months. And in the meantime, the lien stays on your property record. If you tried to sell or refinance, it would be an issue. But you're not doing either of those things, right?" "No, but this is insane." "It is, but it's also potentially actionable. This is looking more and more like harassment with every step they take." The court hearing for the lien challenge was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Linda seemed to think she'd won. I'd see her driving past my house slowly, and she'd stare at the shed with this satisfied expression. But I kept working on building my case. I compiled every document, every email, every interaction. Rebecca helped me organize it into a timeline that clearly showed the pattern of harassment, And then, something unexpected happened. A major winter storm hit western Pennsylvania. The forecast had been predicting it for days. Freezing rain followed by heavy snow, with potential for widespread power outages. The township activated its emergency operations plan, and I got called in to help coordinate. The storm hit on a Thursday night. By Friday morning, Pine Valley had over half an inch of ice coating everything, and the snow was starting. Power lines were coming down all over the township. The warming center at the community center was activated, and guess where the supplies came from? My shed. I spent Friday and Saturday helping distribute emergency supplies, set up heating units, and coordinate with the county emergency management. The supplies from my shed fed and warmed over 150 people during the 3 days when large parts of Pine Valley were without power. Linda's house lost power too. On Saturday afternoon, she showed up at the warming center with her husband, a quiet man named Gerald who always looked vaguely embarrassed by his wife's behavior. She saw me helping distribute blankets and hot meals. For a moment, our eyes met. I didn't say anything. I just went back to work. Jennifer Mills was at the warming center too, documenting the township's emergency response. She interviewed Bill Granger, who made a point of praising the emergency supply depot. "This is exactly why we need local resources," Bill said. When the storm hit, we didn't have to wait for county supplies to arrive. We had what we needed right here, maintained and ready to go, thanks to Tyler Patterson. Jennifer's next article ran on Monday, with photos of the warming center in action and a detailed explanation of how my shed supplies had been critical to the township's storm response. The article was picked up by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and even got a mention on local TV news. Suddenly, I was getting calls from other townships asking about setting up similar emergency supply depots. The county emergency management director called to commend me. The Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency sent an email asking if I'd be willing to present my model at their next quarterly meeting. And Linda Lambert became the most unpopular person in Pine Valley. The HOA meeting following the storm was packed. Even more people showed up than before. Gary Mitchell had his petition, signed by over 70% of HOA members, calling for Linda to resign as president. Linda walked in, took one look at the crowd, and I could see her calculating whether she had any path forward. She tried to call the meeting to order, but Gary stood up immediately. "Before we start, I have a petition signed by the required number of HOA members to hold a vote of no confidence in the current board president." Frank Delacroix, looking tired, nodded. "The petition is valid. We're required to hold a vote." "This is a witch hunt," Linda said, her voice shaking with anger. "I've dedicated years to this community." "You've spent months harassing a man who provides emergency services to this township," Gary shot back. "We all know what you did. The articles, the letters, the complaints, it's embarrassing." "I was enforcing our bylaws." "You were on a power trip," someone shouted from the back. "The vote took 10 minutes to organize. When it was done, the count was overwhelming. 92 members voted for Linda to step down. 8 voted against, including Linda herself." "Fine," Linda said, gathering her papers with shaking hands. "You want to let this community fall into chaos, that's your choice." She stormed out. Patricia Morrison followed her. Susan Cho stayed in her seat, looking relieved. Gary Mitchell was elected interim president. His first action was to move that all fines and liens against my property be permanently removed and that the HOA issue a formal apology. The motion passed unanimously, but the story didn't end there. The court hearing for the lien challenge still happened. because legally it had to proceed even though the HOA was dropping it. Rebecca and I showed up prepared with our entire case documented. Linda showed up too, apparently not willing to let go completely. The judge was a no-nonsense woman named Helen Cruz who'd been on the bench for 20 years. She reviewed the documentation, listened to both sides, and then sat back. "Miss Lambert, I'm looking at a timeline here that shows a pattern of behavior that goes beyond enforcement of HOA rules. You filed multiple complaints with various agencies that were found to be without merit. You trespassed on Mr. Patterson's property. You distributed a newsletter that appears to be defamatory, and you imposed fines for violations that Mr. Patterson had properly permitted." "I was doing my duty as HOA president," Linda insisted. "Your duty doesn't include harassment," Judge Cruz said. "I'm not only dismissing this lien, I'm ordering you to personally pay Mr. Patterson's legal fees in defending against it. That comes to $8,400. Linda went pale. "That's outrageous." "What's outrageous is this entire case. You wasted the court's time, the township's time, and Mr. Patterson's time because you couldn't accept that someone followed the proper procedures and didn't need your approval." Judge Cruz signed the order. "The HOA is also barred from taking any further action regarding Mr. Patterson's shed. If there are future complaints, they need to go through the township, not the HOA. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Rebecca said. Linda just stood there silent. After the hearing, Rebecca and I walked out to the parking lot. "That was more satisfying than I expected," she said. "You think she'll actually pay?" "She has to. It's a court order. If she doesn't, we can pursue collection, and that will just make things worse for her." Linda paid, though it took 3 weeks and required a reminder letter from Rebecca's office. The check arrived with no note, no apology, just the payment. The HOA under Gary's leadership turned out to be completely different. He actually read the bylaws and followed them fairly. When residents had disputes, he tried to mediate rather than dictate. And when it came to my shed, he asked if the HOA could put a small sign on the road near my property identifying it as an emergency supply point, with the township's approval. I agreed, and the sign went up. Pine Valley Emergency Supply Depot maintained by Township Emergency Services. Several months after everything settled, I was in my shed doing a routine inventory check when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned to find Linda standing in the doorway. She looked smaller somehow, less imperious. "The door was open," she said. "I'm not trespassing. Can I help you with something, Linda?" She looked around at the shelves, the organized supplies, the climate control system quietly humming. "I never actually came inside before. I waited." After a moment, she continued. "I suppose I owed you an apology for all of it. It wasn't a great apology. There was no 'I'm sorry' in it, but it was something." "I appreciate that," I said. "I thought you were just trying to get around the rules." Everyone always tries to get around the rules, and someone has to enforce them or everything falls apart. "I understand wanting to maintain standards," I said carefully, "but there's a difference between enforcement and harassment." She nodded slowly. "Gerald told me I'd gone too far." I didn't want to believe him. She paused. "My daughter and her kids were at the warming center during the storm. The supplies from here, they helped. She told me I should thank you. You don't have to thank me. This is just part of what I do. But you do it at your own expense." "Your own property. That's more than most people would do." She backed toward the door. "Anyway, that's all I wanted to say." She left before I could respond. I watched her walk back across my yard to the street where her Lexus was parked. She didn't look back. I never expected to become friends with Linda Lambert, and we didn't. But after that day, she stopped being an active problem. She resigned from the HOA completely a month later and started spending more time with her grandkids, according to neighborhood gossip. Patricia Morrison moved away about 6 months after everything ended. I heard she joined an HOA board in a different township. I felt sorry for them. The shed continued to serve its purpose. We used supplies from it twice more over the next year, once for a tornado warning that thankfully didn't result in actual damage, and once during a heat wave when we set up a cooling center for elderly residents. Each time, the system worked exactly as designed. Other townships did start setting up similar emergency supply depots, and I got invited to speak at several emergency management conferences about the model. It was strange going from being harassed about a shed to being recognized as having created something worth replicating. Jennifer Mills wrote a follow-up article a year after the initial storm, checking in on how the emergency supply system was working. She interviewed me, Bill Granger, and several residents who'd benefited from the warming center. The article ended with a quote from Gary Mitchell. "This whole situation taught us that HOAs exist to serve the community, not to control it. Sometimes the best thing we can do is get out of the way of people trying to help." The HOA did eventually update its bylaws. The new rules included clearer procedures for approving structures, explicit protection for emergency-related buildings, and a requirement that all board actions be documented and justified in writing. Gary pushed through term limits for board positions too, ensuring no one could hold power for too long. I kept detailed records of everything, partly because of my professional training and partly because the experience had taught me how important documentation was. But as time passed and life returned to normal, I found myself thinking about the whole situation less and less. What I thought about instead was the reason I'd built the shed in the first place. Working in emergency management, you see the worst of disasters, but you also see the best of people. You see communities come together, neighbors helping neighbors, strangers becoming friends in crisis. That shed represented my small way of contributing to that spirit. It was about being ready for the moments when preparedness mattered, when having supplies on hand meant the difference between people being cold and scared and people being warm and safe. Linda had seen the shed as a violation of rules, but rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. When rules get in the way of helping people, something's wrong with the rules. The irony was that if Linda had taken 5 minutes to understand what I was doing before launching her campaign, none of the conflict would have happened. She could have taken credit for the HOA supporting emergency preparedness. Instead, she'd made herself the villain in a story about community service. I thought about that sometimes when I was working in the shed, updating inventory or testing equipment. How many other conflicts in the world happened because people didn't take the time to understand before they judged? How many problems could be avoided if people led with curiosity instead of assumptions? The shed became something of a local landmark. People would drive by and point it out to visitors. "That's where they keep the emergency supplies," they'd say. Kids in the neighborhood knew about it because their teachers had incorporated emergency preparedness into their curriculum, and my shed was part of the lesson. I gave tours sometimes, usually to scout troops or school groups. I'd show them how the supplies were organized, explain how the climate control worked, and talk about why preparedness mattered. The kids always asked good questions. They weren't hung up on whether the shed technically complied with HOA aesthetic guidelines. They wanted to know if we had enough supplies to help everyone, and what would happen in a really big emergency. Those were the right questions. 2 years after the initial conflict, I was elected to the HOA board. I didn't really want the position, but Gary convinced me it would be good to have someone with institutional memory of what had gone wrong and how to avoid repeating those mistakes. Serving on the board gave me new appreciation for the challenges of managing a community association. There were legitimate disputes that needed resolution, maintenance issues that required funding, and residents who genuinely didn't follow rules that existed for good reasons. But I tried to approach every situation with the question, what's the purpose of this rule, and is enforcing it actually serving the community? Most of the time, the answer was yes. Sometimes, though, it was no, and those were the times when flexibility and common sense mattered more than rigid enforcement. The shed itself required ongoing maintenance and updates. Supplies had to be rotated, equipment tested, systems maintained. I spent several hours each month on that work, and I didn't mind. It was meditative in its way, the careful checking of inventory, the updating of logs, the testing of backup systems. Bill Granger retired from his position as Township supervisor, but his replacement, a younger woman named Angela Torres, was equally supportive of the emergency preparedness work. She actually expanded the program, setting up 2 additional supply points in other parts of the township. My shed remained the primary depot, but having redundancy made the whole system more resilient. The county recognized the Pine Valley Emergency Supply System as a model program. We got a small grant to upgrade some equipment and add additional communications gear. During a regional disaster preparedness exercise, Pine Valley was specifically cited for having one of the best local emergency resource networks in western Pennsylvania. None of that would have happened if Linda had gotten her way and forced me to tear down the shed. I still saw her occasionally, usually at the grocery store or around town. We'd nod politely to each other but rarely talked. That was fine. Some relationships are damaged beyond repair, and trying to force reconciliation just makes things awkward. But I did notice that she seemed happier in retirement from HOA politics. She'd started volunteering at the library and joined a book club. People who knew her better than I did said she'd become less rigid, more willing to listen. Maybe the whole experience had taught her something too. The legal costs that Linda had been ordered to pay, combined with the embarrassment of the public conflict, seemed to have genuinely changed her. Or maybe she'd always had the capacity for change and just needed something dramatic enough to trigger it. Either way, she was no longer the person who'd shown up at my door with that cease and desist letter. The neighborhood itself became stronger through the ordeal. People were more engaged with HOA decisions, more willing to speak up when something seemed wrong. Attendance at HOA meetings remained high, which kept the board accountable. The experience had taught everyone that community associations work best when they're actually serving the community. I kept working my regular job with the county while maintaining the shed and serving on the HOA board. It was a lot, but it felt purposeful. Every time we used supplies from that shed to help people, every time the township activated its emergency plan and everything worked smoothly, I was reminded why the work mattered. And on quiet evenings when I was in the shed doing routine maintenance, I'd sometimes think about that first day when Linda showed up with her folder full of violations. If someone had told me then how the whole thing would play out, I'm not sure I would have believed them. It seemed too dramatic, too unlikely that a simple shed could cause such conflict and ultimately bring a community closer together. But that's how it happened. A heated shed, an unreasonable HOA president, and a series of escalating conflicts that forced everyone to decide what really mattered. In the end, the community chose preparedness over arbitrary rules, common sense over rigid enforcement, and service over control. The shed still stands at the back of my property, climate-controlled and well-maintained, full of supplies that hopefully never need to be used in a major disaster, but are ready if that day comes. It's more than just a building now. It's a symbol of what a community can accomplish when people work together, and a reminder of what happens when petty authority gets in the way of genuine service. Linda Lambert tried to block my heated shed. What she discovered was that some things are more important than HOA bylaws. Emergency preparedness is one of them. Community service is another. And the willingness of ordinary people to help their neighbors is perhaps the most important of all. That shed will be there for years to come, quietly serving its purpose, ready for whatever emergency might arrive. And if the system works the way it's supposed to, most people will never need to use it. But they'll sleep better knowing it exists, and that in a crisis, their community is prepared. That's worth more than any HOA compliance could ever be.